So our final speaker of the evening is John Davison, who has just set up Studio Syrup a few months ago. I'm sure he'll tell us a lot about that, but also his experiences running Kanoti, who I spoke a little bit about earlier. But I'll let him tell us the story.
All right. Thanks, Martha. Yeah, hi everyone. So this story is really about, so I ran a creative agency. I was a co-founder with a business partner, and between 2007 and 2014, we set up this creative agency in Brighton, and doing lots of lovely stuff, which I'll show you a bit, because I can't do a talk without showing any work at all, so I'll show you some old stuff. And but it's really so we're down in Brighton. Previous to that, I was a freelancer for 7 years. So I was always a maker. I was trained in illustration and learned how to animate, then learned how to make interactive stuff. And before I set up the business, I was working 70 hours a week and earning no money as a freelancer. So I've just I sort of knew I either wanted to get a job or find a kind of partner who would kind of facilitate making a business. So I came across Sarah, my business partner, or ex-business partner now, and so she was very sort of business, project management, organisational, so we set up this business, and so they went from 2 to about 25 in sort of 6 years, and so we worked for lots of broadcasters, BBC, MTV, Nickelodeon, Disney, and did lots of cultural stuff for Tate and that kind of thing, lots of educational games, lots of kind of youth stuff. Did a brilliant game for Channel 4 Education about resilience and body image, and loved doing that kind of purposeful stuff for young people. And yes, at the end we closed at the end of January this year, and Martha got in touch last week and said, "Do you want to do a talk on failure?" Which is always very flattering, and said, "Do you want to talk about what you sort of learned?" And I said, "Give us a couple of days to think about it, because it is it really knocked me for six, and I think one of the interesting things, and one of the things I wanted to talk about, is that sort of mix of psychology and the rational, and even and it's funny sort of doing this talk, and I a lot of it you'll go, well, why didn't you do it, and it's kind of a lot of it is kind of pretty common sense, but I think what's really interesting in the experience of creating something that you love is this kind of intertwined psychology with the kind of rational, particularly when you're running a business and trying to make money and do all that stuff. So I'll show you the old show reel, just so you know I'm not a complete failure. We did some nice stuff. Thanks. So that's what we did. So yeah, as I say, I just wanted to kind of cover the story of what went wrong, and I think this is a very distilled kind of simplified version of it. And as I say, it's I was reading a blog today about a startup that failed, and he wrote it 2 years later, and he said, why don't I write this sooner? He said, because it would have had a layer of emotional energy to it. So this definitely has a layer of emotional energy to it. And but it's been really cathartic and useful, and hopefully there's something of value for you and definitely for me. So external factors. Technology disruption. I mean, it's interesting because in 2007 there was no iPhones and all of that stuff, and I think we coped with that in the HTML5. The death of Flash was kind of a small thing, but perception was a big thing. And I think as we got on, we sort of been doing Flash games for years, and then suddenly there are startups that only do HTML5 or Unity or whatever it is. So for a small little agency in Brighton like us, that perception issue was definitely a factor. Again, probably not in 2007, but certainly 15 years ago, ad agencies would charge for content. So they do a TV ad, they do a magazine ad, they do a billboard, they do radio. These days, you have to, do you do a Vine commercial campaign, social media, or there's a huge amount of strategy work in terms of where you're going to put your content. And as a kind of small production agency in Brighton, it was really hard to kind of sell that, and often we would just give that stuff away for free. And it's something I'll talk about a bit more in terms of lessons learnt. But it's a huge factor, particularly with the broadcasters, where we would so for CBBC, we'd spend an average of 14 days on a pitch, and that might be 3 people. And so if you didn't win it, that's dead. Dead time and dead money, and a huge amount of resource going into that, and a huge amount of kind of emotional energy you have to put out. You really have to get your adrenaline going, believe it's worth all the effort, and it's definitely a factor in our pitch win rate was actually really high, but I think the amount of costs to actually, even when you win them, was just a factor in terms of the profitability of jobs. And one of the things, as a kind of Brighton-based, hard to get visibility in London, bit of a generalist. We do animation, we do interactive stuff, do illustration. So we kind of were a bit generalist, and I think it's one of the key things I'll talk about in terms of learnings. But when you're in that pool with other agencies, you cannot help but be competing on price. And I think particularly with things like the technology disruption, where things got more complex, but the budgets didn't necessarily reflect that complexity, testing on multiple devices and all that stuff. So again, another squeeze is just, being in that squeeze on price. So yeah, so interestingly, in our first year, there were 4 of us, and our turnover was about 200 grand, and our net profit was 100 grand. And then as the years went by, we kind of had more and more staff. As I say, got up to about 25, and so our turnover increased, but our profit just got smaller and smaller. And I think probably there's a turning point after about 12. So we went from sort of 12 to 18 quite quickly. And when you're that size, you kind of need this sort of supporting structure. Suddenly you've got to communicate in a different way. You've got a team of people with personal problems, bastards. And so you've got HR, you've got operations, you've got production management and finance, and all of these people are not billable. So suddenly you had this huge framework of support staff that are not being charged out, but necessary. And so that's the kind of logical, rational stuff I can think of. And so this is really, really personal to me. I mean, this is, my business partner would probably have a different take on this, and this, just as this is what kind of psychologically made me lose my mojo, I suppose. So I think, as I say, with that growth comes that red tape, and there became lots of processes to do stuff, and everything was very quantified. We had people had timesheets they had to measure. So there's this huge tension, and I've heard the guy from Pixar talk about this, but it was really, really present, is the tension between creative excellence and profit, and there should always be a healthy tension. And but I think for me personally, as a creative person, my driver was to make creatively excellent stuff, and It's and also I kind of believe that our positioning was to be a top quality, making exquisite stuff and get work on the back of that. So therefore, there's this sort of dilemma of do you go the extra mile and make a bit less profit, and so it's. But I think that as that growth, those structures and those processes came in place. I remember one project manager said to me, John, I want you to stop talking now because you're costing us money and the profitability is going down. And it literally kind of got, the project managers were under so much pressure to keep the profit up that it sort of became an unhealthy tension. So as we got bigger, and so I stopped doing much creative stuff. I ended up writing lots of pitch documents. And I sort of became a manager, and I did, by the end, I sort of didn't even manage that many staff, which I actually liked. And by the way, there's lots of layers in this. Like some of the stuff I can't, there was stuff I enjoyed and stuff that kind of I didn't enjoy some of the time, So it's, but I think. Essentially, I lost my mojo in that I stopped making stuff. And became this kind of focus on the strategy of the company and all of that stuff, and actually, in terms of time, it really freed up my time. And our intention was to make more money, have less stress, have more time. And actually, when I had more time I just found it a bit boring, and I just missed that kind of startup frantic kind of mission, and it kind of got a bit safe or something. I don't know, but. So, what that led into was an erosion of purpose, and I think, the company was started out of a kind of passion to bring creativity to young people, and I was really driven, and I loved. It was a really new thing, a really new experience of working with other people. I've been a freelancer, sole person, and really loved empowering other people. In the first couple of years, we employed lots of graduates. Who are now, incredible artists, incredibly deeply skilled people, and I'm very proud that I made that contribution to them. And I think that by the end of it, I was like a manager of a big beast that just didn't. It just lost my purpose. That's what I'm trying to say. Thank you. Lack of shared values. So, as I said about my business partner, so I heard some expression the other day about people with different learning skills make the best teams if they don't kill each other, and I think that was a real factor. And so Sarah, as I say, very process-driven, brilliant attention to detail, brilliant financial mind, organisational mind, and but interestingly, it sort of dawned on me that. If you're that sort of person, then how do you kind of evidence your aptitude? And you do that by growing a company, and you do that by making money and sort of having a successful business. And I think for me, that was the kind of driver for me was creative excellence, working with a great team, doing great work, putting lovely things in the world. And so there was, it became, and it's interesting, when you're winning and you're growing, then that stuff, those dysfunctions you can live with, but when things get a bit tough, those dysfunctions suddenly amplify, and it's definitely apparent that we wanted different things, and that's really hard to reconcile at that point in time. And I think what's really interesting in terms of the psychology, I mean, you saw the show reel there, so some of it was for kids, some of it was was a bit more corporate, and I think as we got bigger, that you suddenly have this beast that you want to feed, and you become, or we were really chasing the work, and desperate to just keep the machine rolling. And I think because of that, there's this sense of leaning forward. Nobody likes a divorcee at a disco, and there's this kind of psychology of desperation that actually it really weakens your positioning, and it weakens the clarity, and it weakens the your perception. And I think that's a really, really key learning that I got from this. That I'll speak about a bit more as well. So as I say, once we're in that kind of desperation mode, then it's interesting. you have this scarcity mentality, so you can see this sort of downward spiral as we're going forward. And I think once we kind of got slightly into crisis mode, and it's funny, my train was delayed. I was coming from Brighton, and so I was really late, and then I just ran past the building about half a mile, and then had to come back. And it's interesting that once you're kind of under a point of stress, then your decision making becomes flawed or whatever. So there's this slight impact of the psychology. Once you're in crisis mode, it's quite hard to come out of. Yeah, so loss aversion, a sort of good and bad thing is that I had about 10 creative guys and developers that we sort of hired, in the first few years, and nobody left. There was just no turnover of staff. There was, in my department, in the creative department, so there's a really solid camaraderie and a lovely, good bunch of friends. So when the time came that we had to make some redundancies, there's this terrible loss aversion, and interesting as really, I'll try and make a game design point, but somebody's talking about, Farmville, how people, the loss aversion drives you going back and feeding your crops so you don't lose them, but incredibly strong human driver. And again, this sort of emotional, psychological decision making versus, rational. When you've been with a bunch of good people for a long time, it's hard to lose them. And in fact, that was, the hardest thing of the whole experience, I think. So as I say, once we've got this, we made 3 rounds of redundancies trying to save the company, and it may have been possible to limp on, but actually I just thought, this has been 6 good years of my life, and there is it's all right. It's all right to end it, and I think actually there's something. It was clear for me that it was kind of the end of the chapter, and that was fine. And by the way, we paid everybody and paid all the freelancers, and so we actually went in. It was a voluntary insolvency, but managed to pay everyone and did it with as much integrity as possible, and just owed the taxman a bit of money. And and that was really important. Those guys are still good friends. So lessons learned, and again, this is in development, and I think it's still it's been really useful doing this exercise, as I say, and I think it is I'm setting up this new studio, and so I have a whole, so you have pros and cons. So if I do the opposite of what I did, then there's a whole new set of problems to learn from and all of that stuff. However, this hopefully is some, a bit of lessons learned. So I think the thing with failure, I'm sure I saw a slide of failure makes me ill, or that humans generally think that failure makes them a loser, and there is that, and me too. It's bruising. It was bruising, and I think what I've found, and even in doing this, and what I'm sort of doing repeatedly, is to get it complete. And I guess Americans would call that closure or whatever. But I think what it's done for me is to, particularly when I put it in the context of what I was doing before, of getting grumpy with clients and never seeing my wife or whatever, is that I met a bunch of great people, did some amazing work, talked about work in New York, and did some brilliant things I'm very, 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 very proud of. And for me, it's I think that I heard that I'd sort of really into neuroscience or whatever, and I heard a great thing about the brain being a prediction machine. So the brain predicts the future based on the past. So therefore, your worst future has already happened. And I think unless you kind of complete the past, it will just repeat. And I think it's a difficult thing to do for humans because of that very reason. But it's a very, very important thing and a very useful thing. So know your purpose, and again, when I say your, I mean me. Really, I'm talking to myself. But I think that's one of the things I'm doing right now is working on the positioning for Studio Syrup, and it's a hard thing, but a really pleasurable thing to do. To there's 3 things that I just am made for in this world, which is great storytelling, empowering young people, and making beautiful things. And that's a really lovely thing to get authentically in my purpose, and to have that be a stake in the ground, because that gives me clarity, and it sort of it means decisions are made for me, and things I don't want to do, those decisions are made. Yeah, so keep it niche. As I say, that stake in the ground, I think it gives real clarity. And I just read this book, which I can really recommend. It's online, you can read it for free online, which is How to Win Work Without Pitching. I don't know if any of you know it. It's a kind of utopian dream, really. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but I think it's really focused on positioning and how powerful that is to have a niche, have a stake in the ground, have a specialism, have a deep expertise, and then you're not competing on price with a generalist. You have a side exit with which to have conversations with people, and I think it's a really powerful thing and something I'm working on. And interestingly, what's from the psychology point of view, is that it's really scary to do that and to say, okay, I'm shutting off all this other stuff and I'm just going to do this. And actually, that's a kind of scarcity mentality, or an example of that if you shut things off, then you think other things will disappear. And it takes some courage to do that. So it's kind of interesting process going through that right now. So right now we're keeping it small, and I love the feeling. Basically, we have this piddly little studio. It's basically like a shed. There's 6 of us in there. The BO smell is wonderful. And there's one woman in there. I feel very sorry for her. But anyway, it's home. It's cool. It's very, very low. It's incredibly low overheads. Basically, the guys, I've got 5 guys working with me who are all ex-Kanoti, but they're all freelance. So it's incredibly low commitment right now, which is psychologically kind of cool. Yeah, and I think just going back to that loss aversion thing, when it came to the time, I remember somebody saying to me, think about getting rid of the ones you don't want to get rid of, because usually, there's these guys. There's one guy who was our first employee, was there for the whole 6 years, but or there was a few of the early guys, and he said it's probably those that have got not your best staff, and maybe that's true, but incredibly hard to be that cold and rational about people, but in terms of productivity, their output, their skill set, and all that stuff, I think it's really good to shrink and grow according to your according to the demands. And I think the other thing of, like, we had this huge beast of 20 people, and we tried to feed it by doing any old crap, and actually, it would have been great to shrink down to 10 and do the work we loved and that was meaningful to us. Yeah, so really nice for me to get back to doing most of what I love. So I'm getting back to doing a bit of making, managing a small team, and that's a real driver for me. Is that it's been a while. It's kind of weird, sort of making stuff again. I'm rusty, but it's just an absolute pleasure to get back into the sort of design process. And I think I remember a bit of business coaching over the years. People say these things to you that you take on board. And they said, as a business owner, that you shouldn't necessarily be doing the things you're good at, but you should be doing the things that you should be doing. And in a way, that's good advice, because the things that you're crap at are often the things that are neglected. But I do think going forward, it's something I want to minimise or delegate, if nothing else. Yeah, so again, just the pitches, conversations, not presentations. Did this pitch presentation a week ago, spent 4 weeks on this pitch, and then she just said, this woman in the pitch said, I just don't like this game idea, and she said, I don't think it's on brand enough, and I just thought, why don't you fucking tell me that? And it's it's incredibly inefficient for both sides, and there's a kind of respect, a kind of there's something nourishing about those conversations, rather than the adrenaline of a pitch where you kind of get a one-page pitch brief that you interpret, and it can be wrong, and then you go in there, do your thing, and you're all nervous, and it just seems incredibly flawed to me. So it's something I really want to work on, and I have just pitched, so I'm sort of a realist as well. Yeah, chaos beats bureaucracy. So as as I say, as we got bigger, that these layers of sort of red tape and bureaucracy grew, and I just think it killed creativity. And I think that timesheet stuff, or sort of quantifying creative people in such a tight way is really stifling. And I think creativity comes in fits and starts. You can do nothing all day, and then the way I work is I'll think about it, nothing, and then there's a sprint. where I get some inspiration. And I just think that that chaos is actually, I'm really enjoying the chaos of it right now. And actually working with a team who have worked in a highly kind of controlled environment means there's a sort of embedded, self-discipline. So it means we can have kind of, controlled chaos, if you like. Yeah, so just in terms of the values, and I think if going forward, what I could be responsible for is that I wasn't. I found it really hard to align what I wanted with this kind of beast we created, and I think it was just what became a roller coaster and very hard to kind of turn this beast around to something I could shape. And so that's just a personal thing, something for me. But I think that that communication can resolve anything, and those resentments or that sort of dissatisfaction or lack of authenticity about what makes you happy really killed off my experience, and it definitely killed the company in the end. Know your boundaries. That's another business coach said this to me. She said, "John, you got to know your boundaries." And I think what I mean by this is right now I sort of know what's important to me, and I think I've got 2 young children, and I've had clients ask me to meet them on Saturdays, or that thing of you get a bunch of emails that people have sent over the weekend. I never check my emails over the weekend, and I think that sort of that boundary is really healthy, and it sort of facilitates a mutual respect, and it's something I think is really important. So yeah, be pragmatic fast. Just re-emphasising the the thing of it is capitalism, not a fanpany, as us two call it. And this is a Buddhist saying about be unattached. If you love it, give it away, and that kind of thing. And I think it's really hard to do, but it's something I kind of I think it's a nice saying, and that sort of sense of insignificance. Things can get really significant when the shit hits the fan. But actually, that perspective and that insignificance and that lightness and that unattachedness is actually really useful for me going forward. Yeah, and kind of the same thing really, but that sense of fluidity. I think once you have a thing, then you think it's the truth, and you think it's the way it is. And I think actually change is inevitable and good. And I think one can get complacent about flux, and actually that humans don't like change, but I think as a business person, things go up and down, and that sort of embracing flux and fluidity is something I'll take on. Enjoy the journey. I think that it's interesting. We sort of tried to. It was our ambition to kind of grow and maybe have an exit plan. I think our sort of primary aim was that we just had that we were able to sort of delegate everything, and we could work part time or whatever. But I think we're so driven by that end goal that a lot of the experience was, it was hard to enjoy the journey at points, I suppose. And just to finish, don't take capitalism personally. And I think that's, it's, that it is, you are at the mercy of market forces and technology and all this other stuff. And actually people are grown-ups that they have their circumstances, but you're not responsible for for your staff in a way. Or I guess I'm talking to myself. I'm a rescuer, so I always kind of have this sense of responsibility, and and actually it's an economic engine, and it is both those things. So I think for me that sort of distinction. It's a sort of parallel distinction that these are great people, but this is an economic engine. And that's me. Thanks, guys. Cheers for listening.
Wow, thank you for sharing all of that. Has anyone got any questions for John?
I thought it was very thorough. There's a lot of meat there, so it's kind of difficult to know.
Hi. So you mentioned something about shared vision, and there was a conflict of values between you and your co-founder. And did you try to address it? What was the experience like?
I tried to address it. What was the experience? I asked me in the pub. I can't. I don't want to say that on video.
There's one over here and then at the back.
Hi, thanks for that. I just had a question about how useful it is to consider the idea of just wiping the slate clean when you fail, and a bit linked to the idea of not being too attached. Because, yeah, that was kind of coming from both of the last presentation and this one, the idea of letting go of something.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think it's a bloody hard thing to do. As I say, our personalities are the sum of our experiences. And one of the things I mentioned to Martha is that, I'm working with guys who we've been through that experience, and they know shit can fail. And actually, when I started, as many people do, you have that naive, blind faith that everything's going to be great, and actually that kind of works for a while. So I think it's a hard thing to do, and a really, really good practice. And I did. One of the first things I did was when the company folded was to go and meet a coach and do a lessons learned session, and even that, it can be really, really simple, but a declaration that it's over, and that it's that experience is done, it's finished, and you're not in crisis anymore, and so I'm sort of working on ways to do that, but I think it's an incredibly good thing to do as a human being. Yeah.
Hi, that was really insightful, especially the bit about resourcing against revenue and growth and profitability, because you can really get carried away in terms of reaching your targets. So 2 questions. Based on what you've gone through, what would be your kind of advice in potentially getting a co-founder? And then secondly, especially in the early stages when you're hiring, how important is it that the people are aligned to the vision versus this pressure of, hey, we need to do it quick, we need to do it fast, there's a lot of iteration going on, and budgets are quite lean.
Yeah, I think that I'll answer backwards, but I think if your purpose is clear, and as a team of people, you know what the purpose is, and you have a clear kind of path, it actually makes it much easier when you veer from the path. So it's like, all right, at the moment, I'm a small startup and I'm doing any old work right now, but there's a vision. I know where I want to get to, and my staff know what that vision is, and there is so they kind of have a context about that stuff that is, building a foundation of a bit of cash and sort of stepping stones to getting to that vision. So I think that it just gives somebody said, another business quote about clarity is the most important thing in business, and I think it is, internally, externally, and there's so much energy in the world there's so much faff in the world, you know what I mean, and it's and I just think it cuts out an immense amount of faff if you have an intention, and I think it's that intentionality is just simplifies and gives direction to everyone. And in terms of partners, I think it's a tricky thing. You kind of don't if you've got a mate or you've got somebody with the same values as you. There's one thing, but in terms of skill sets, it was incredibly effective that we had incredibly different skill sets. So I don't know the answer to that. We just had different drivers, and I think if you're able to fulfill your own drivers, then it's doable. But I think it's a bloody hard thing, and you spend more time with that person than your partner, and you're in much more of a stressful situation. So it's like choose carefully, because it's a big relationship. It's a sexless marriage.
Yeah, thanks for that talk. That was brilliant. I'm going to tell everyone to watch it on YouTube when it's up. But this group is filled with lots of small-scale entrepreneurs, one-man bands, 2-3-man bands. And I think there's a perception in the tech industry generally that if you don't scale up, you've somehow failed. Yeah. And what your talk has made me do is reassess that. And I wondered if you could sort of give some advice to people who are thinking, oh God, if I'm not the next Facebook, what's the point, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. Everything is growth acceleration and growth, and I just I do it if you want. What do I think? I think that with a creative agency like ours, it seems to work if you're either very small or very big. You know, the ad agency is 500 people. They can sort of sustain all of that extra bump. And I think, the tech stuff is very high risk, and usually, it's it's not an area. It's not my particular area. But I do think it's okay to have different drivers. Know what makes you happy, because before you know it, you might get what you wish for, and you have a massive team, and it's just, just like it's your. I think you get a lot of this external stuff, and actually, it's quite like even when we won awards or whatever, it's like you get this external kind of feedback, but it's slightly hollow unless you're actually fulfilling your own. Drivers, that actually you've got some balance in your life and you're happy, and that actually you're putting something good in the world, and you have some sort of legacy that you're so I think it's just my personal thing, but I think you're right. It's a bit of a red herring, and it doesn't it's not necessarily a good thing.
Any other questions? It was interesting you mentioned like Pixar, and I read some of the same things from them about how they've scaled from being like a small operation and then being really huge, but still managed to keep it creative. But do you believe that really is possible, and that someone like that has achieved it, or being
it's I can only imagine. I think that. They have a clear sense of purpose. They have, they're the best at what they do. They get to work on amazing stuff. All of that stuff really helps. And I think you inevitably have a different type of culture when it's that big that suits some people, not others. So who knows? But maybe.
Sorry?
US location means a lot also.
Yes, definitely.
Cool. Great. Thank you very much, John.
Thank you. Cheers.